It is more blessed to give than to receive. I was reminded of this tonight as I was walking in the parking lot. I got out of the car and I was by myself, and Gabriel is still not well, so Mary's at home with Gabriel and James and Marley. Marley Hayes just happened to be sitting right there, and she was at the little playground area, and she goes, "Where is James?" And she said, "Where is your family?" And I said, "Well, they're at home." And I said, "Gabriel's not well." She said, "So you're all alone?" She said, "You can sit with us." And I just thought, that is the most precious thing ever. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And then was in here, I was talking to Miss Ruby, and Marley was going around, and she had a bag, and she had a little ornament for the tree. She gave me one. And I'm thinking about it's more blessed to give than to receive, and I'll tell you, I was blessed tonight. And it's just a precious reminder, and that's going on the tree. By the way, I mentioned this morning. But where do we get that phrase? It's more blessed to give than to receive. We talked about that a little bit at the 8:15 this morning. And if you will, let's look at Acts chapter 20. Verses 32 through 35 is where we find this phrase. And it's a phrase of Jesus, but it's a phrase that we've never heard Jesus actually use. It's one that Paul claims that Jesus had used. And so that's how we know that it's something Jesus said. And it would be another study for how James heard a message from Jesus that we've not heard. And so it is powerful. It would be one that maybe go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and recognize that Jesus did minister to Paul. This possibly is one of those phrases that he heard. Acts 20 verse 32 beginning, it says, "And now I commend you to God." And this is Paul talking to the Ephesian elders as he's going to Jerusalem. He's been told by the Spirit that he's not going to return. This is the last time on this earth he's going to see these men. And it is the most touching, precious account because they cry together there on the beach as he leaves Miletus, never to see them on this side of heaven. Verse 32, it says, "And now I commend you, elders in Ephesus, to God, and to the word of His grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. You yourselves know that these hands minister to my necessities and to those who are with me. In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how He Himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" So since we have not heard this directly from Jesus, we could imagine this is something that Jesus would say. This is maybe one of those that when we look at John chapter 20, that many other things Jesus did and said, but the volumes wouldn't be able to fit in the world, the things that could be written about Jesus. This is just one of those extra sayings. And so we could see something along these lines in something that actually Jesus does say, and that's in Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45. So that's where our lesson is going to find its focus, its points, in Mark chapter 10, verses 35, beginning. If you'll turn there with me. This is Jesus speaking with James and John. They needed to hear it's more blessed to give than to receive because for them, it seemed like something different. It didn't seem like it is more blessed to give than to receive. If you look, let's see, make sure. Y'all can maybe advance the slide. There we go. Well, too far. It seemed better to receive than to give. And so often it can seem that way. I definitely was blessed to receive this tonight. And it does remind us that we are blessed in receiving gifts. But when it comes to what James and John, what their focus is, they had the wrong focus. And we see that in Mark chapter 10, verse 35, beginning. If you'll turn there, that you're already there. Verse 35 says, "And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to Jesus, and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.'" This is a pretty bold statement. Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask of you. How is Jesus going to respond to this? Can you imagine having that ability to request this of Jesus? Whatever we ask of you, we want you to do it for us. I love verse 36. "And he said to them, 'What do you want me to do for you?'" Jesus didn't say it depends. He said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And it shows that Jesus had the mentality, it's better to give than to receive. But James and John did not have that. Verse 37, it says, "And they said to him, 'Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in glory.'" They want Jesus to give his right and left hand in glory. They want to sit next to him when he enters into his kingdom. We understand that at this point, they're going to think that the kingdom is earthly. And so they're wanting to make sure that they're taken care of forever in this life. And they want Jesus to grant that request of them. Can we blame them for wanting to have this request? We realize that they're not alone in this desire. Someone put them up to it, I believe, based on Matthew's account in Matthew chapter 20 and verse 20 beginning. If you'll turn there with me. Matthew 20 and verse 20 beginning through 21 says, "Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee," this is James and John, "their mother came up to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, 'What do you want?' She said to him, 'Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom.'" So it shows that their mother put them up to it, but it also shows that this is a desire that they had. And so who can blame the wife of Zebedee? Who can blame their mother for wanting this for her sons? Don't we want the best for our children? Don't we want to make sure that they are sitting at the right and left of Jesus? Yes, we do. But again, they're thinking that his kingdom is earthly. But they're wanting to make sure that they're taken care of. And I can see that. But they don't know what they're asking for when they're requesting this of Jesus. Simply because they think that the kingdom is earthly, they're thinking one thing when they're asking this question. But because the kingdom is spiritual, they don't even realize what they're asking. And that gets us to our second focus. They received more than they wanted when they asked this of Jesus. In Mark chapter 10, back there in verse 38, it says, "Jesus said to them, 'You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?' And they said to him, 'We are able.' Jesus said to them, 'The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." Well, who is it that it has been prepared? Mention it briefly this morning when Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. And he says, I go to prepare a place for you. Again, he is speaking to the apostles there, but he's referring to the preparation for all of us. We are all going to be able to sit at the right and the left of Jesus in his kingdom because of what Jesus was willing to do when he went to the cross. And that's what he was talking about when he asked, are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? We understand that Jesus has talked about that cup in Gethsemane when he was praying to the Father, let this cup pass from me. It's not talking about a drink. They recognize this. And if you will, turn to Psalm chapter 16. This is one of my new favorite Psalms. There is just so much meat in this chapter. And if you're looking for a psalm to memorize, I encourage you, memorize this chapter. It's powerful. It's only 11 verses. But there is so much here. We're just going to look at verse 5. You see that David says, "The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot." So the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. Later on in chapter 23, verse 6, he says, my cup runneth over. He says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runneth over," or overflows. So when it comes to the cup, we recognize it's the responsibility that God has laid upon us. And he said, "My lot is before you." It's literally the responsibility that we have. So when Jesus is saying, "Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink?" Are you going to be able to be responsible for what I'm responsible with? And they respond, "Yes, yes, we can." They don't know what they're asking. They don't know what they're saying. They do recognize, obviously from this just Jewish history, that this is a responsibility that Jesus is referring to. He's not referring to a specific type of drink. It's referring to their responsibility. And Paul talks about this in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 17. If you'll turn there with me. Philippians 2 and verse 17 beginning says, "Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me." He realizes the responsibility that he has. And in fact, in Acts chapter 9, if we look at the conversion of Saul, when he goes to the man Ananias, or when Jesus comes to Ananias in a dream and says, "Go and find Saul," and he says, "Do you not know who this man is?" Jesus says, "Go, for he's a chosen vessel of mine, and I will show him what he must suffer for the cause of Christ. I will show him the cup that he's going to have to drink. I'm going to show him the cup that's going to be poured out as this drink offering," in essence, is what Jesus was saying there. And so obviously Jesus did show this to Paul, and Paul is saying, I am to be poured out as a drink offering. So he knew his ministry, he knew the purpose that he had in this life, and oh, if we had this focus, that I'm here for a short period of time, and my cup is to be poured out for others. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Again, we're getting a little bit more of a picture as to what Paul was talking about in Acts chapter 20 and verse 35. Later on and again, well, keep in mind, in Philippi, with the Philippian congregation, where was Paul at this time? He's in prison. This is one of the prison epistles. And so we understand that this is where his frame of mind is, that he's there for the cause of Christ, that he's literally being poured out for Christ. His life has become a sacrifice for Christ. But later on, toward the end of his life, and he's an older preacher, and he's trying to encourage a young preacher by the name of Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 5 through 8. It's no longer "I will be poured out" as a drink offering. Notice what it says. He says, "As for you," he's telling this to Timothy, "be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." He's telling him to fulfill his ministry because he's about to say, "I'm about to fulfill mine." Look at verse 6. "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing." Paul got to meet a lot of people, and through his influence got to see people who loved the appearing of Jesus. They've loved the appearing of Jesus, and they're going to love it even more when Jesus returns, appears on that final day that he was referring to. He's saying, "I have already been poured out." He saw that his ministry was fulfilled, and he was willing to pour out his life into others, to Timothy here, so that he would fulfill his ministry and in turn pour himself out into somebody else to try to help them to see Christ, so that they would then pour out their lives into other people as well. So we get this picture of it's better to give than to receive. We see a little bit more than a Christmas slogan that oftentimes is said during this time of year. It's better to give than to receive. And recognize the context for what Paul was saying. He was about to give everything. You see, James and John received more than they wanted. You see, they were the first and the last to drink the cup. James was the first apostle to die a martyr's death. So when Jesus is saying, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? They said, yes, we can. He says, you will drink this cup. And we see that in Acts chapter 12. In Acts chapter 12 and verse 1 beginning. Acts chapter 12. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread. Herod was trying to please the Jews and just kills a random person to him. Well, he saw him as a part of the leadership. He saw him as one of the apostles. And he drew first blood. He killed James. So this is fulfilling what Jesus says, you will drink the cup that I'm going to drink. In the same way that Jesus said, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless not my will, but your will be done. God told Jesus, you are going to drink this cup. And he died on the cross. James also died for the cross, for Christ. So it's in the third place, we understand from Mark chapter 10 that it's better to serve than to be served. That's another way of saying it's better to give than to receive. It's better to serve than to be served. If you will, look at Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10 again. Verse 41 beginning. When the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So I wonder if Jesus knew when he was talking about who would be first among you must be slave of all. He who must be great among you must be your servant. The fact that James and John both said that they could drink of this cup, and James was the first to die a martyr's death. He first, as an apostle, not like Stephen, but James being the first apostle to be martyred, he served the rest of the apostles in showing that he was able to take of the cup that Jesus did. I wonder if all of the apostles remembered that interaction between James and John. Obviously, we saw that they were indignant with them. When the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. How dare you? How could you? But they most likely would have remembered. I know John would have remembered. And John had a whole lot longer of a time to remember and to contemplate the goings-on of speaking with Jesus at this time, because John was the last apostle to die. Because instead of being martyred, he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos. And that's how we have the book of John, one of the last books of the New Testament. That's how we have the book of Revelation. God had in mind that he was still going to use John to be a servant for all of us, for you and I. They would drink the cup. But in the same way, Paul had the mentality to live as Christ and to die is gain. Their life was literally a cup that was to be poured out for you and for me. They understood that it was better to give than to receive. I wonder what John thought in his old age, possibly up into his 90s, as tradition has it. I wonder what he thought as he remembered that time that he spoke with Jesus. And he wanted to be the greatest in the kingdom. Oh, how foolish he had been. But oh, how much he was reminded of what Jesus said was right. It's better to give than to receive. It's better to serve than to be served. In fact, that's what Jesus said in verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is the slogan Jesus lived by. He came to serve others. That was the purpose that the great physician came to this earth, to heal the sick, to take care of those who needed help. He came to serve. We're reminded of that in John chapter 13 as he took a towel around his waist and he washed the disciples' feet. They needed to remember and realize that their purpose was to serve all of mankind with the gospel message. And we're reminded now that it's better to give than to receive, so much more than a Christmas slogan. So much more than something that, it only makes sense to even make that statement at this time of the year. And sometimes as a society, that's not a slogan that you hear any other time. It's so important that we remember the context to what's being said. Paul, meeting with the elders of the congregation in Ephesus, that he's trying to explain to them the reason why they are elders by the Holy Spirit, to shepherd the flock of God that's among them, to make sure that the vicious wolves that were going to be coming in, that weren't going to spare the flock, even coming from among their own eldership. They had to make sure that they stood strong, that they didn't forget it. Paul was being poured out for them, just like Jesus was being poured out for the apostles. You see how they were taking care of the church. That it went from Jesus to the apostles, from the apostles to the elders, and so on and so forth. That's why we have elders to this very day. And we follow them and their example as they're being poured out for this congregation. As our teachers and our ministers are being poured out for this congregation, how all of us are being poured out for those we meet, for our friends, for our neighbors, for strangers, co-workers. May we be willing to be poured out for other people and have this concept that when it says it's better to give than to receive, he's referring to giving your life. He's referring to not just giving a gift and not receiving a gift. He's talking about giving all you have. Because he's about to go to Jerusalem and he's been told by the Spirit he's never going to return. Let's go back to Acts chapter 20 and recognize the finality in this statement. In all things I've shown you, verse 35, that by working hard in this way we must help the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful, most of all because of the word he had spoken, that they would not see his face again. And they accompanied him to the ship. We've got to recognize that we have a job to do. And this doesn't need to be a slogan for just one time of year. This needs to be the focus for our lives. It's better to serve than to be served. It's better to give than to receive, because we're striving to bring Christ into the life of those who are weak, to uphold the words of Jesus just like Paul had said. And I'm reminded of some more words of Jesus that we're going to close with in Luke chapter 14 and verse 25. Jesus is referring to counting the cost. That when we see the context to what that slogan was saying, that this is the finality of life, and recognizing that he's giving everything he has and he's making sure that these elders know the seriousness of taking care of the flock of God. The seriousness of making sure that we stand and hold up their Christian light in a world of darkness. We don't give up. Verse 25, now great crowds accompanied him. And he turned and said to them, again, this is one of the most challenging passages we're about to read. Verse 26. Jesus said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. What on earth is Jesus talking about here? I thought we're supposed to give to others, not hate them. We're going to keep reading. This is referring to making the decision to be a disciple of Christ. Making sure that no person, that no thing ever gets in the way of us putting Christ first. Because he says, verse 27, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. You see, when we make the decision to be all in for Christ, to be focused on Jesus in our lives, it's going to cause people to question, why are you doing that? Why are you living in that way? It could even cause us to alienate other people. It can cause us to even alienate fathers, mothers, wives, children, brothers and sisters. But really, if you think about it, it should only be for a time. Because through our influence, may we strive to show and shine a Christian light to our family so that they see the difference. They see what the gospel has done in changing that individual, so that our father becomes our brother. Our mother becomes our sister. You see what this is referring to. For which of you, verse 28, desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Again, when you go to make the decision to follow Christ, are you willing to consider the cost? Are you willing to consider how much this is going to take? Again, because it's better to serve than to be served. It's better to give than to receive. This is the focus for being a disciple. If we don't sit and count the cost, whether we have enough to complete it, look at verse 29. He says, otherwise, when he's laid a foundation and is not able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish it. Notice the others here would be mothers, would be fathers, would be wives, children, brothers, and sisters who are literally contemplating whether you're really, truly following Christ or not. And if you don't finish, they say, see, I told you so. I told you you were no account. I told you that this was all a fad. I told you that this was not anything that you were going to be able to follow through with. Verse 31, or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. As we're focusing on Purpose Sunday, the ultimate purpose is that we give our lives to Jesus, that we give our lives to the Lord, and the rest will follow suit. If we love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, we'll have the capacity to love our neighbor as ourselves. God deserves our all as we give our lives to Him. This evening, have you counted the cost? Have you focused solely on following Him and allowed the rest of your life to be a result? It's so easy to allow the cares of this world to creep in. It's so easy to realize. It's funny, I was preparing for this lesson, and the washer started to ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I mean, it started, something happened. Mary found a piece of plastic inside, and that drum had smashed through the wall, and we're just going to have that noise for a little while, right? I was having a Bible study this morning and in the office, and my phone, I just happened to have it in my lap, and it fell off and hit the plastic on the floor. I noticed there's a big crack across it today. You know, when it comes to the things that we have, they're going to break. And it could easily be like, oh, well, that wasn't a part of the budget. That wasn't it. It doesn't, and that's just as silly as anything in the world. It could be health issues. It could be the struggles that literally are going on from day to day that we face. And what I just said was as trivial as can be, and I realize that. But it is so easy for those things to get in the way of the plan that God had for you and me. For the work. We've got to get to work. To count the cost. Because Jesus was willing to. He was willing to take that cup and pour himself out to die for you and I. In Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, he says, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself. Take up his cross daily and follow after me. Have you denied yourself tonight? We have an invitation here to make sure that you're living your life for God, and maybe you have allowed the cares of this world that are bigger than the little trivial things, and they become so big that you've lost sight of what's truly important. Can we pray with you, encourage you? If you have that need, don't go another moment without it being known. Whatever that is, please come while together we stand and while we sing.